Sheila sat rigidly on a park bench, her eyes narrowed as she watched the children play. Her gaze fixed on Kyra, a black woman laughing and playing with two white children. Sheila's fingers tightened around her purse strap, her jaw clenching with every joyful squeal from the kids. As she observed, memories flickered through her mind. Images of her childhood self, playing without a care in the world with children of all colors and backgrounds. She remembered the warmth of those friendships, the innocence of those days. But those memories felt distant now, replaced by a hardened worldview that saw danger and suspicion in differences. Sheila's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the call button. Was she really going to do this? The laughter of Kyra and the children echoed in her ears, and something in her snapped. She pressed the button, her voice steady as she spoke to the police dispatcher. "There's a situation at City Park," she said, her eyes never leaving Kyra and the children. "I think these kids might be in danger." As she hung up, a mix of emotions swirled in her chest. Righteousness battled with doubt, but she pushed the latter aside. She was doing the right thing, wasn't she? Protecting these innocent children from what exactly? The question nagged at her, but she shoved it down, focusing instead on the approaching sirens in the distance. Sheila watched as Kyra continued to play with the children, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Part of her wanted to warn them, to call it off, but her conviction held firm. She was protecting these kids, she told herself. It was the right thing to do. As the police car pulled into view, Sheila's heart raced. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. Two police officers approached the playground area, their presence immediately noticeable in the peaceful park setting. Sheila watched from her bench, her heart pounding as the officers made their way towards Kyra and the children. She could see Kyra's smile falter as she noticed the approaching officers, but the children, Liam and Ava, continued their play, oblivious to the tension building around them. Officer Johnson, a tall man with a stern expression, spoke first. "Ma'am, we received a call about a potential situation here. Can we have a word with you?" Kyra nodded, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. "Of course, officers. Is everything all right?" As the officers began to question Kyra, Sheila strained to hear their conversation. She watched as Kyra calmly explained that Liam and Ava were her children, adopted 2 years ago. The love in Kyra's voice was evident as she spoke about her family, and the children occasionally ran up to her, seeking her attention before darting off to play again. Officer Martinez, the younger of the two, knelt down to speak with Liam and Ava. The children's easy manner with Kyra and their obvious comfort around her began to paint a picture very different from what Sheila had imagined. As the conversation continued, Sheila felt a growing sense of unease. The scene before her didn't match the narrative she had constructed in her mind. She shifted uncomfortably on the bench, torn between her initial suspicions and the reality unfolding before her. The officers, seeming satisfied with Kyra's explanation and the children's behavior, began to wrap up their inquiry. Sheila could see the tension leaving Kyra's shoulders as the misunderstanding was cleared up. But as relief washed over Kyra's face, guilt began to gnaw at Sheila's conscience. Yet, despite this creeping doubt, Sheila couldn't bring herself to approach the group and admit her role in the situation. Her prejudice, deeply ingrained, still whispered justifications in her ear. She remained rooted to her spot, an observer to the aftermath of her actions, as the officers bid Kyra and her children goodbye. As the police officers concluded their conversation with Kyra, curious onlookers began to gather. Neighbors who had been walking their dogs or enjoying the sunny day were drawn to the scene, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. Among them was David, an old childhood friend of Sheila's, who was one of the first to approach Kyra. David, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, spoke to Kyra in a warm, reassuring tone. "Is everything okay here? Can we help with anything?" Kyra, still visibly shaken from the police encounter, managed a small smile. "Thank you. It seems there was a misunderstanding, but it's being sorted out." As more people gathered, a sense of community support began to build. David, recognizing the opportunity to diffuse the tension, began sharing stories from his childhood. "You know," he said, addressing the group. "This park has always been a place where kids of all backgrounds came together. I remember when Sheila and I were kids, we'd play with children from all over the neighborhood, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from." His words carried across the gathering, and Sheila, still seated on her bench, felt a pang of discomfort. She watched as her neighbors nodded in agreement, some adding their own memories of a more inclusive past. The atmosphere in the park began to shift. What had started as a tense situation was transforming into an impromptu community gathering. People shared snacks, children resumed playing, and adults engaged in conversations about diversity and acceptance. Sheila, however, felt increasingly isolated. She watched as her community rallied around Kyra and her children, demonstrating the very openness and acceptance that she had forgotten. The stark contrast between her actions and the community's response left her feeling out of place in a neighborhood she'd called home for decades. As laughter and friendly chatter filled the air, Sheila remained on the outskirts, a silent observer to the warmth and kindness she had failed to extend. The gathering served as a powerful reminder of the community's values, challenging Sheila's prejudices in a way she couldn't ignore. As the impromptu gathering continued, Maria, an old friend of Sheila's, spotted her sitting alone on the bench. With determination in her eyes, Maria approached Sheila, her face a mix of disappointment and concern. "Sheila, we need to talk," Maria said firmly, sitting down next to her. "What's happened to you? This isn't the Sheila I grew up with." Sheila shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Maria's gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about," she muttered. Maria wasn't having it. "Don't play dumb with me. I saw you watching earlier. You called the police, didn't you?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Sheila's silence was all the confirmation Maria needed. "Remember when we were kids?" Maria pressed on, her voice softening slightly. "We used to play with everyone in this park. Color, race, none of that mattered to us. What changed?" Sheila's defenses rose. "The world changed, Maria. It's not as safe as it used to be. I was just trying to protect those children." Maria's eyes flashed with anger. "Protect them from what? From a loving mother? From happiness? Listen to yourself, Sheila. You're not protecting anyone. You're just spreading fear and hurt." The harsh words hit Sheila like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to argue, but found she had no response. "Look around you," Maria continued, gesturing to the gathering. "This is what our community is about. Acceptance, love, support, not suspicion and prejudice." Sheila felt tears pricking at her eyes. I didn't mean to cause harm," she whispered. "But you did," Maria said, her tone firm but not unkind. "And now you have a choice to make. You can keep living in this bubble of fear you've created, or you can remember who you used to be and try to become that person again." As Maria's words sank in, Sheila felt a wave of shame wash over her. She looked at the group, at Kyra and her children, at the faces of her neighbors, all happy, all accepting. For the first time, she began to see the true impact of her actions and the pain she had caused. Overwhelmed by her confrontation with Maria, Sheila retreated to a quiet corner of the park. From her new vantage point, she had a clear view of Kyra and her children, still playing and laughing with the other families. The joy on their faces was undeniable, and it struck a chord deep within Sheila. As she watched, memories began to surface. Sheila saw herself as a young girl, playing in this very park with friends of all backgrounds. She remembered sleepovers with her best friend Sarah, whose parents had immigrated from India. There were birthday parties with classmates from various cultures, each one a celebration of diversity and friendship. These recollections brought a lump to Sheila's throat. When had she lost that openness? When had fear and suspicion replaced curiosity and acceptance? She thought about the phone call she'd made earlier, the assumptions she'd jumped to at the sight of Kyra with her children. The shame of her actions weighed heavily on her shoulders. Sheila realized that her prejudices hadn't protected anyone. They had only caused pain and division. Yet, even as she acknowledged the harm she'd done, Sheila felt conflicted. Years of ingrained beliefs and fears didn't disappear in an instant. She struggled with the desire to change and the comfort of familiar, albeit harmful, thought patterns. Sheila watched as Liam ran to Kyra, throwing his arms around her in a tight hug. The love between them was palpable, challenging every assumption Sheila had made. She felt a strong urge to apologize, to make things right, but fear held her back. What would she say? How could she explain her actions? Would Kyra and the community ever forgive her? These questions swirled in Sheila's mind as she grappled with her internal conflict. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Sheila made a silent promise to herself. She would try to change, to relearn the openness of her youth. It wouldn't be easy, and she knew she had a long way to go. But watching Kyra and her children, Sheila knew it was necessary. The first step, she realized, would be the hardest, facing those she had wronged and taking responsibility for her actions. As the evening progressed, the impromptu gathering in the park took on a festive atmosphere. Community members, touched by Kyra's story and dismayed by the earlier incident, began organizing a show of support. People arrived with blankets, folding chairs, and an assortment of snacks and drinks. David, taking charge of the situation, started setting up a small buffet on a nearby picnic table. "Let's turn this misunderstanding into a celebration of our community," he announced, his voice carrying across the park. The aroma of freshly popped popcorn and grilled hot dogs filled the air as neighbors shared food and stories. Children darted between adults, their laughter a counterpoint to the serious conversations taking place. As twilight settled over the park, David stood up to address the group. "Folks, I want to thank you all for coming together like this. What happened today, well, it's not what our community stands for. But this right here, this is who we are." He gestured towards Kyra and her children. "Kyra, we want you to know that you and your family are a valued part of this neighborhood. Your love for Liam and Ava shines through, and we're lucky to have you here." Kyra, visibly moved by the outpouring of support, stood up. "Thank you all so much," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When those officers approached me earlier, I was scared. But seeing all of you here, standing with us, it means more than I can say." As Kyra spoke, other neighbors shared their own stories of friendship, acceptance, and the importance of diversity in their community. Each tale served as a powerful reminder of the bonds that held their neighborhood together. From her secluded spot, Sheila watched the scene unfold. The warmth and unity on display stood in stark contrast to her earlier actions. She felt a growing sense of isolation, realizing how out of step she had become with her own community. As the gathering continued, with music now playing softly in the background and children chasing fireflies, Sheila found herself longing to be part of it. Yet, the weight of her actions held her back, leaving her on the outside looking in at the community she once felt so connected to. As the community celebration continued, Sheila felt an overwhelming urge to join in, to make amends somehow. She stood up from her isolated spot and tentatively approached the group. However, as she neared, she noticed several neighbors casting wary glances in her direction. Some even turned their backs, their body language clearly communicating their disapproval. Sheila's steps faltered, and she stopped short of the gathering. The rejection, though unspoken, was palpable. She stood there, uncertain and conflicted, feeling more alone than ever in a sea of familiar faces. Just as she was about to retreat, a small voice piped up beside her. "Hey, lady, why do you look so sad?" Sheila looked down to see Liam, one of Kyra's children, looking up at her with innocent curiosity. His presence caught her off guard, and she struggled to find words. I'm just thinking about some things I did wrong," Sheila replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam tilted his head, his eyes wide with childlike wonder. "My mom says when we do something wrong, we should say sorry and try to make it better. Have you tried that?" The simplicity of the child's wisdom struck Sheila deeply. She felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at Liam, seeing not a threat or a problem, but just a kind-hearted little boy. "No, I haven't," Sheila admitted, her voice cracking, "but maybe I should." Liam nodded sagely, then suddenly smiled. "Want to come play with us? We're having a great time." For a moment, Sheila was tempted. The innocence and forgiveness in Liam's invitation were a balm to her troubled conscience, but she hesitated, glancing over at Kyra and the other adults. I don't think that would be a good idea right now," Sheila said softly, "but thank you for asking." As Liam shrugged and ran back to join the other children, Sheila remained rooted to her spot. The brief interaction had shaken her to her core, challenging her preconceptions and forcing her to confront the reality of her actions. She watched as Liam rejoined his family, the love and acceptance surrounding him a stark contrast to the isolation she now felt. Sheila knew she needed to make a change, but the path forward seemed daunting. The gulf between her and her community felt wider than ever. Yet Liam's simple words had provided a glimmer of hope. As the celebration continued around her, Sheila stood on the precipice of a decision that would shape her future in the community. Steeling herself, Sheila took a deep breath and approached the group. As she neared, conversations hushed and all eyes turned to her. The tension was palpable as she stood before Kyra, her heart racing. "Kyra," Sheila began, her voice trembling slightly, I need to apologize to you." Kyra's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a mix of wariness and curiosity. The surrounding neighbors watched intently, creating a silent circle around the two women. Sheila continued, her words coming out in a rush. "I was the one who called the police. I saw you with Liam and Ava, and I jumped to conclusions. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Kyra's face hardened, her eyes flashing with hurt and anger. "You did what? Do you have any idea what you put me through? What you could have done to my family?" Sheila flinched at Kyra's words, but forced herself to meet her gaze. "I know. I was wrong. My actions were based on prejudice and fear, and I can't justify them." Kyra shook her head, her voice tight with emotion. "Your fear could have torn my family apart. Do you understand that? My children could have been taken from me because of your baseless suspicion." The weight of Kyra's words hit Sheila hard. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I do understand now, and I'm truly sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I see how wrong I was." As the tension peaked, David stepped forward. "Sheila, I've known you for years. What happened to you? This isn't the person I grew up with." Sheila's composure cracked. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Somewhere along the way, I let fear take over. I stopped seeing people and started seeing threats. But being here today, watching all of you, talking to Liam, I realize how much I've lost by thinking that way." The crowd murmured, some faces softening with understanding, others remaining skeptical. Kyra stood silent, processing Sheila's words. Finally, Kyra spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Sheila, I appreciate your apology. But understand this, words are easy. It's actions that count. If you're serious about changing, about making amends, you have a lot of work to do." Sheila nodded, a mix of shame and determination on her face. "I know, and I'm willing to do that work, if you'll give me the chance." As the confrontation reached its climax, the community held its breath, waiting to see how this moment would shape their future together. In the wake of her confrontation with Kyra, Sheila felt a profound shift within herself. The reality of her actions and their potential consequences had finally sunk in, leaving her with a clear understanding of the changes she needed to make. "I want to do better," Sheila said, addressing not just Kyra but the entire gathering. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I'm committed to learning and growing from this experience." Her words were met with a mix of skepticism and cautious hope from the onlookers. David, ever the mediator, stepped forward. "That's a start, Sheila. But how do you plan to make that happen?" Sheila took a deep breath, her mind racing. "I'll start by educating myself. I'll join community groups that promote diversity and inclusion. I'll volunteer, if you'll have me, to help with neighborhood events. I want to be part of this community again, the way I used to be." As she spoke, Sheila could see a gradual change in the expressions around her. The hostility began to soften, replaced by tentative acceptance. One of the neighbors, an older woman named Grace, spoke up. "There's a diversity awareness workshop at the community center next week. Why don't you come along?" Sheila nodded eagerly. "I'd like that. Thank you, Grace." Kyra, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Actions speak louder than words, Sheila. I'm willing to give you a chance, but you need to prove that you're serious about this change." "I understand," Sheila replied solemnly. and I'm ready to put in the work." As the tension began to dissipate, the gathering slowly returned to its earlier, more relaxed state. Sheila, though still on the periphery, was no longer entirely excluded. She engaged in careful conversations, listening more than speaking, beginning the process of reconnecting with her neighbors. Later that evening, as the event was winding down, Kyra approached Sheila. "There's a community picnic next month," she said, her tone neutral but not unkind. "If you're serious about being part of this community again, you should come." Sheila felt a glimmer of hope at the invitation. "I'll be there," she promised. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." As she left the park that night, Sheila felt the weight of the day's events, but also a sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with uncomfortable self-reflection and hard work. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was on the right path. As weeks passed, Sheila made efforts to follow through on her promises. She attended diversity workshops, volunteered at community events, and slowly began to rebuild trust with her neighbors. However, her journey towards redemption took an unexpected turn during a neighborhood council meeting. Tom, a longtime resident, stood up to address the group. "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room," he said, his voice firm. "Sheila's recent incident with Kyra isn't an isolated event." A hush fell over the room as Tom continued. "Over the past few years, there have been several similar calls to the police, all based on unfounded suspicions. And they all trace back to Sheila." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Sheila felt the blood drain from her face as she realized her past actions were coming to light. "We've discovered at least 5 instances where Sheila reported suspicious activity involving people of color in our neighborhood," Tom explained. "Each time, it turned out to be a false alarm, causing stress and humiliation for innocent families." The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Sheila, overwhelmed by shame, struggled to find words. I didn't realize. I never meant to." Kyra, who was present at the meeting, stood up. Her face was a mix of disappointment and resolve. "Sheila, we gave you a chance to come clean, to make amends. But you didn't tell us the whole truth." The community, once cautiously accepting of Sheila's efforts to change, now grappled with this new information. Many felt betrayed, their trust shattered once again. David, trying to maintain order, spoke up. "We need to address this as a community. Sheila's actions have caused real harm, and there need to be consequences." After much discussion, the community decided on a course of action. Sheila would be required to attend intensive bias training, perform community service specifically aimed at supporting minority groups in the neighborhood, and participate in restorative justice sessions with those she had wronged. Sheila, realizing the full impact of her actions, accepted the consequences without protest. "I understand now how much damage I've caused," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm truly sorry, and I'm ready to face the consequences and do whatever it takes to make things right." As the meeting concluded, Kyra approached Sheila once more. "This is your last chance," she said firmly. "We're willing to help you change, but you need to commit to this fully. No more secrets, no more excuses." Sheila nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I promise," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust and become a positive part of this community." As Sheila left the meeting, she felt the weight of her past actions and the long road ahead. But she also felt a glimmer of hope. With hard work and genuine change, she might one day truly belong in this diverse and caring community again.